Today we're making sauerkraut and kimchi. Really, we're making fermented vegetables because, as I understand it, the word sauerkraut means fermented cabbage in German, and the word kimchi means fermented vegetables in Korean. You could also follow this recipe to make any other type of pickled vegetable that your heart desires. It's a fairly straightforward technique that I learned from my teachers at Koviashevik, local living school. So thanks again, Chris and Ashira. I'm forever grateful. We're following a specific recipe that I learned from Sato Ramen, which is a ramen shop in Washington, D.C. that I worked at almost 10 years ago. So thanks, Jay, for that recipe too, and I'm happy to share it with everybody. The technique that we're using is lacto fermentation, lactic acid fermentation, which means it's fermented using salt. The anaerobic conditions in the jar disallow the existence of any bacteria, save the several forms that conduct the processes of fermentation. Fermentation, as applied to food products, basically just refers to any sort of change being conducted within a food product by enzyme activity.
Without oxygen. That's key.
Without oxygen.
Cultivating the bacteria we want. We don't want other toxic bacteria. We want lactic acid fermentation.
Right.
That's what we want.
Napa cabbage, daikon radish, ginger, scallions, chili flakes, and fish sauce. I wish you could smell it. You like that?
I love it.
If you want to, with humility and respect, learn about sauerkraut and kimchi, just Google it, right? What we're learning about now is universal method that can be applied to vegetables that was used around the world for thousands of years to preserve food outside the realm of industrialism without the aid of refrigeration. Fermented vegetables were buried underground in giant pots. You make a giant pot underground, open up the lid, and it's living underground. So essentially the vegetable's in a root cellar, right? It's protected from freezing in the winter, and being underground keeps it cool so it doesn't ferment too quickly in the summer. The most key ingredient is the salt. So we're using, is this umbrella person? Right, Morton salt. If you have access to seawater, 1 gallon of seawater makes a cup of salt if you boil it and dry it out. But you can also use salt from the store, because everything comes from the store until there's no more stores. 1 tablespoon of salt per pint. And you could use anything, any type of vegetable. I always do it in the jar. I mean, the masher is really nice to mash right into the jar. We should just do it, and then we should talk more about it, right? Are you bored? It's a good way to save vegetables that are going bad and really bring it back to life. But you can just take these right off. Take off any outer leaves that are ugly. Give it a wash. In the age of coronavirus, we'll give it a rinse. We'll rinse the virus off. Rinse off the virus. Nice to give things a flat surface. It's not gonna wobble. Then we're gonna quarter it. Take the heart out. Maybe I would cut once down the middle. And then leave these chunks pretty big. Bigger chunks over time stay crispy longer. The smaller you chop it, the mushier it will be. Right? So the recipe that I'm using requires a jar for measurement. I have an estimate that what we've got here is going to fit in here. What we will often do is mix in this big Tupperware. The Tupperware is really nice because you can put a lid on and shake it. You know, should I not be recommending people to use a big plastic Tupperware?
I think that the focus of these videos should be using your resources. And in the modern day world, we have Tupperware. And it could be some Tupperware that you get from like Goodwill. It could be Tupperware that you get from a family friend. The reality is that we have Tupperware and we made it and we destroyed the planet over it. Why not use it? That's my spiel.
So we're mixing in the Tupperware.
We're mixing in the Tupperware.
It doesn't matter how you cut it, but what I like to do is make these matchsticks. Cut these slices and then turn it, and then you've got these long, thin little strips. So it's mostly cabbage, then a little bit of radish, and even less ginger and scallion. We could, you could do tiny slices. You could do thin slices. You could do whatever you want to do.
I feel like Bob Ross.
Do whatever the hell you want to do. It's like Bob Ross. Right, mm-hmm. Bob Ross. Thank you.
Got a happy little tree. Do whatever feels good to you, man.
But I don't like a mouthful of ginger. So I think it's been working good with the chopped ginger, right? And then you have the flavor of ginger interspersed. You can't have too many scallions, can you? You can use more scallions. This is the pepper that I'm using now. That's the brand. Some like it hot. So I would say that's
mild.
Should I add more?
No.
Okay. This is oyster brand fish sauce. Certainly feel free to leave it out if you're a vegan, right? So I just use maybe a little dash and a 1, 2, 3. Whoop, one more. Good. And maybe one more. Now it's time to mash. Now when it comes to mashing in the jar, it's not a twist. It's not a grind. You're not trying to mush it and smush it away. You're just trying to pound it down. Mash, mash, mash. The salt. The spoon is really nice too. The spoon can get in there and act as a mixer just to make sure that the salt gets evenly dispersed. So you can see there's already, ooh, look at those bubbles. There's already water in there. So you don't have to add water, right? There's enough water in the vegetable. It's just lightly tap it. You give it a mash, but it's a light mash. It's an easy mash. It's a loving mash. More veggies. You don't need a masher. I mean, you can mash. It's more of like a chopping mash. The flat masher is really nice, but you can mash with a spoon. We're gonna just get perfectly lucky with the amount of veggies to the size of the jar. Last of the salt. At the top, I don't even really mash because I think to preserve the crisp, you want to make a whole jar of crispy veggies that's still going to be crispy a year from now. Make sure that the juice comes all the way up to the top of your jar. Throughout its fermentation process, you'll need to monitor it a little bit. What you want to do is just leave it in a place. Kitchen counter, wherever. Somewhere where you can keep an eye on it because it's going to be on the counter for at least a couple weeks. For as long as a couple months. The longer it stays out on the counter, the more it will ferment. The more the salty flavor, if I tasted this now, it'd be too salty. The salty flavor will turn into that sour, lemony flavor. Put it on a towel so that as it bubbles over, it doesn't make a mess. If you screw it on really tight, it will swell and you're at risk of breaking a jar. Just leave it with a towel, right? Maybe with a rubber band or a piece of string. And this would just be so bugs don't get in. We're gonna put the lid on lightly so that the gas can escape if it needs to. Spicy fermented vegetables. It's kimchi. Put it up high. We always put ferments up here on top of the cupboard. And hot air rises, so it's a little warmer up there.
It'll definitely ferment faster somewhere where it's warmer.
If it does get moldy on top, you can scrape that mold off. Start tasting it after a few weeks and keep tasting it. And whenever it's tasting great, whenever you want to stop that fermentation process, you can just stick it in the fridge at least a year. They're still nice and crispy and good. Crispy crunch. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.